Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Hello everyone and good afternoon from Jakarta. My name is Ray and I will be the Master of Ceremony for today's event. Welcome to FPCI-GRIPS Virtual Public Forum on assessing the climate diplomacy in the run-up to COP-27. Today's event is the third forum of this year's Virtual Public Forum series brought to you by Foreign Policy Committee of Indonesia in collaboration with the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, or GRIPS Japan. Today, I am pleased to welcome around 400 participants tuning in to our channel from across Indonesia and also from abroad. We have attendees from 37 countries, including Japan, Malaysia, Cambodia, Ethiopia, and many more. Before we continue, I would like to inform you that we provide live interpretation from English to Japanese. So if you're joining from Zoom, you can click on the bottom right of your screen for language option. Ladies and gentlemen, climate diplomacy focuses on the global effort to keep the increase of Earth's temperature below 1.5 degrees. There is definitely a need for extraordinary and multilateral solutions, as well as unwavering global commitment to address the climate crisis. The Conference of Parties, or COP, is the only multilateral avenue that drives global efforts in climate change, and the avenue will become effective when countries exercise their commitment. The upcoming COP-27 in Egypt, where all stakeholders must be ready to present their climate commitment, is expected to be more ambitious. Questions are looming. Can countries level up their commitment, particularly for developing and manufacturing countries? What are the priorities and the achievable targets of COP27? What would be the most delicate issues this year? And how is the implementation of the Glasgow Climate Pact? As I'm sure everyone is excited to jump into the discussion, so without further ado, let us begin today's event with a welcoming remark by Ambassador Yutaka Imura, Senior Fellow at GRIPS Alliance and a former Ambassador of Japan to Indonesia. So Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ray. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a good pleasure for me to participate in the third FPCI-GRIPS Public Forum today. Since the middle of last year, actually, GRIPS and the FPCI have been collaborating on a variety of intellectual exchanges, including online conferences, webinars, and public forums. Two previous FPCI-GRIPS public forums were held under themes of update on the European security situation and its impact to Indo-Pacific, and taking stock of RCEP scorecard and other regional economic architectures. On those occasions and others, we have had active discussions on international politics, security, and economy, particularly focusing on the Southeast Asia. Today, under the theme of climate change, assessing the climate diplomacy in the run-up to COP27, we have invited a moderator and panelists from universities, research institutes in Indonesia and Japan. Japan has been advocating at various multilateral meetings, such as COP26, that the country around the world should take proactive measures to cope with climate change, which is increasingly serious and difficult to confront. Prime Minister Kishida participated in the World Leaders Summit of COP26 in last November. He urged all parties to act ambitiously, recognizing the period until 2030 as critical decade. He also shared Japan's commitment in the field of climate change, such as its updated nationally determined contribution, NDC, toward 2030. $10 billion additional assistance in the coming 5 years, and doubling adaptation finance, promoting green innovation, and participating in the global methane pledge. at the Major Economic Forum on Energy and Climate leaders meeting in this June, Prime Minister Kishida stated also that Japan was ready to play a leading role in promoting decarbonization and enhancing the resilience of the international community and of the Indo-Pacific region in particular. He added that Japan would fully mobilize its technologies, experiences, know-how, and finance skills, and would work on advancing decarbonization and enhancing resilience under the concept of Asia Zero Emission Community, while seeing naturally the varying realities of Asian countries. I believe that potentiality is very high for ASEAN and Japan to promote financial technical cooperation towards green growth and energy transition. At the same time, the current geopolitical situation, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, are causing problems in the global economy, such as unstable energy and food supplies and economic downturns. In this context, it has also become necessary to consider realistic and sustainable climate change policies. In today's public forum, I strongly hope that the panelists will engage in lively discussions on the impact of the current geopolitical problems on the climate change policies, assessment of the outcome of last year's COP26, and the challenges and prospects for this year's COP-27. In concluding, I wish you a productive and lively discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ray.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you so much for your kind remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let us start today's discussion. So allow me to invite our moderator for today, Rebecca Angeline. She is the Executive Director of Yayasan Rumah Energi. So Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ray, and thank you so much for the opening remarks from Ambassador Imura. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I would also like to welcome our panelists for today. So first up, we have Ms. Mika Obayashi. She's from Renewable Energy Institute, and she's the director of the Renewable Energy Institute. And we have Aditya Rani Putri, or D3. She's the executive director of Yayasan Cerah Indonesia. And last but not least, we have Mas Arif Wijaya, who is the program director of WRI, World Research Institute. So I'd like to welcome our panelists. Thank you for your willingness in sharing your insights and knowledge towards COP27. So as mentioned by Ambassador Imura, that one of the biggest challenge in this year's COP27 is the geopolitical situation with the Russian invasion of Ukraine being the biggest factor. And before we move into the preparation going towards COP27, I want to, look back at the progress that we made, if there is any progress made post COP26. But before that, I want to highlight that our panelists for today are all experts in climate policy, but each of them have their expertise as well, area of focus. So perhaps if I can invite D3 first to share what's the progress specifically on coal phase out after COP26, taking into account the Russian invasion to Ukraine?
Thank you, Becca. It's good to be here. A very good afternoon to all of the participants from Indonesia, from Japan, from all over the world. I see there are also participants from other countries as well. I would like to apologize beforehand if my connection and my voice doesn't come across as good as it should be, because I am finding myself in an impossible situation at the moment. I'm on the road but I'm nevertheless glad to still be able to take part in this forum. Just to quickly answer your question, Becca, there has been progress achieved in spite of the geopolitical crisis engulfing the world in the area of energy transition. That the progress is measured, I have to say, but nevertheless, it's much welcome progress, particularly regarding coal phase out. As we remember, in Glasgow, the wording coal phase down had been agreed by the participating nations at the COP-26, and it was included in the Glasgow Pact. Coal phase down, I like to be optimistic, right? Essentially means to basically transition out of coal, right? Even though it is not coal phase out, but phase down. But I would like to think that it essentially means the same. And we have seen progress in energy plans, especially around the world in major developing countries, where coal projects have started getting canceled or being taken out of the pipeline. And also discussions has progressed in countries such as Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, regarding the possibility of the early decommissioning of existing coal power stations under a global scheme called the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And this was also the same concept underpinning the deal that was announced at the COP26 for South Africa. 8.5 billion has been pledged under the Just Energy Transition Partnership scheme to help South Africa transition out of coal and accelerate the uptake of renewable energy in the context of accelerated energy transition. The concept underpinning the deal is sound. International finance will international finance in the form of public finance blended with private finance will help countries buy out, coal assets, will also compensate for any efforts at the moment locking in these countries into the coal-based economy, right? And there are a lot of aspects of the deal, of the JETP deal. There's also another deal that is very similar. It's called the Energy Transition Mechanism that still need to be ironed out, needs to be figured out, especially governance. And then the other part are safeguards. But still, this is progress that we all need to celebrate and appreciate because of the geopolitical context that we are finding ourselves in at the moment. And we hope that in COP27, this progress will be taken forward in concrete deals being made, being struck on energy transition, particularly on coal transition finance.
Wow, that's huge. Considering the current geopolitical situation. So I want to move to Mika, continuing to what Dietrich mentioned, that I know that Renewable Energy Institute published a report on renewables for the energy security of Europe and Japan. And you mentioned in that report that Russian invasion to Ukraine is not the only factor. And there are other geopolitical factors playing in relation to the changing energy supply and demand market at the moment. Can you please share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. In Japan, that actually after COP26, that as Ambassador Inuma already mentioned, I have to say that the Japanese government that promoting the policy of decarbonization in Asia through zero emission thermal power is going on. And then it was declared by Prime Minister Kishida at COP26. And then it's really heavily being promoted now. This means that fossil fuel power generation will be made zero emission through the use of CCS and CCUS. And then I think that this kind of initiative is contradictory what previously mentioned, like the energy transition mechanism that already Japanese government pledged to donate $2,500 million. And then that transitioning that existing coal-fired power plants that into the more sustainable form of energy, the renewable energies. But actually, on the ground, in the reality, I have to say that what is happening in Japan is that renewables are steadily expanding. And then I assume that Japan's solar power generation expected to reach around 80 gigawatt by the end of this year. And also for the first time in history of Japan, that the solar has become the cheapest source of energy. I think that is another dimension which the current geopolitics that brought us, like soaring fossil fuel prices made the renewables really affordable energy for all. And then even in Japan that this is happening. And then in some part of the country, like Tokyo metropolitan government, that they announced to introduce the solar rooftop obligation to the new housing that from 2025, that is to protect the households' account and also the lives that are confronting the severe, very heavy weather situation, and also swallowing the fossil fuel prices. Those kind of contradiction, like kind of we are facing the solar fuel prices soaring, but at the same time, we see the cheaper renewable energy sources on the ground, and then that kind of promotion is now undergoing in the reality.
Okay, thank you, Mika. So I want to go back a bit on the coal phase down. So nowadays we have this because from what Dmitry mentioned, it seems like there's not it seems like, but it obviously like several countries have going on the right pathway, but we see the EU, they're now some of the EU member countries, they're reopening their coal power plants, or they're reallocating their sourcing of coal and other fossil fuel from other countries. So what do you think about this sort of taking a step back from the developed countries, Dmitry?
Yes, that is a very important point that we need to be discussing here. The reality is, given the geopolitical crisis, European countries facing a energy crunch, especially leading up to winter, as they grapple with their dependency on gas coming from Russia, has had to relapse into using coal, restarting the coal power plants that have been mothballed previously. I like to think that this is a temporary measure. The biggest country, in question here, for example, Germany, yes, they have restarted their coal power plants. Unfortunately, they have to, facing, energy prices that are just rising through the roofs, right? But they have also taken steps to strengthen their resolve to completely get out of this dependency by 2030. So that I think we need to appreciate. We need to keep, I feel like the world needs to keep the eye on the price, right? And the milestone that we all need to be, closely watching is, of course, 2030. These temporary measures, when, if the steps taken today are, well thought out, right? And if measures are in place to rapidly phase out of this relapse, then European countries can make sure that this backpedaling, right, remains temporary. But of course, the whole world need to be watching them and need to be supporting them in their effort to keep this phase temporary. The European countries, on another hand, they also face the demand of actually putting the $100 billion of climate finance on the table, right? And we know that the G7 summit ended with, a promise made to abide, by this pledge. However, it was also stated very vaguely, and it is looking very, it is looking less likely now that anything significant in the realm of climate finance in terms of commitments or in terms of, funds actually put on the table will actually materialize. But again, we just hope that, let us just hope that this is just temporary, and that next year, the, global economy will improve. Situations around the, caused by the geopolitical crisis will be alleviated. Let's hope the geopolitical crisis itself will end next year, and that European countries will bounce back rapidly, not just on their energy transition trajectory, but also on their climate finance commitments.
Thank you. For this issue, coal phase down and the, I'm still not used to it, but coal phase down and the energy transition, I want to ask a question to Mika. So it looks like this is like a great opportunity for renewables to, fill in that gap and to make sure countries achieve their energy security in this difficult time. So how quickly can countries deploy their renewable energy? Because I just read an analysis the other day saying that even for EU countries, it's not easy to just reallocate their suppliers for the LNG because it needs time to build the infrastructure. So how quickly can renewables be deployed to cover this gap?
But actually, that most of the EU countries has a very high, ambitious renewable energy target by 2030, namely like Portugal, Austria, Denmark, and the Netherlands, that they have the almost 100% of renewables by 2030, and then Germany, Spain, that about 80%, and then UK. It's not the EU country anymore, but still they have the almost 100% of renewables by 2030. And then adding that, for example, US, that they are saying that they will decarbonize the whole power sector by 2035. So I think that this way is, so we are talking about the energy crisis and then geopolitical changes, but at the same time, the acceleration of the climate change action and also going forward for renewable energy lead us to the energy independence from fossil fuel. Current energy crisis is a fossil fuel crisis. So that how fast we can remove that fossil fuel makes us that our independence of the energy supply. So I think that as the EU is saying, that climate change and then energy security is the one way to go. And then acceleration of achieving that the Fit for 55 is that way to achieve that the energy security for EU. So I think that they are accelerating more and more renewable energy policies, and then that they would be able to achieve almost 100 renewables that by 2030, at least at the 2035. That is a kind of the thing that the developed nations are talking about. But unfortunately for Japan, that under this crisis, the government is providing that the subsidiaries for the fossil fuel, and then tried to maintain the lifetime for the old coal-fired power plant as well, and then acceleration of the new investment for the fossil fuel power plant even, and then sudden announcement of the nuclear power construction as well. So I think that this way is delays the energy transition that with the renewable energies that for Japan.
Thank you, Mika. So I would like to shift the issue now a bit to the forest and land use. So Mas Arif, yeah, so we're lucky now because we have like 3 panelists covering the coal phase out, the renewable, and the forest and land use. So Mas Arif, so forest and land use sector is not it's not immune from the what's happening globally with the effects coming from the Russian invasion of Ukraine, is the increasing energy price and then the food price as well, and the global inflation, scarcity in fertilizer. So what's the effect on what's happening geopolitically to the commitments made in COP-26 to halt, to reverse forest loss and to protect forests and indigenous people back last year.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone's here in Indonesia, Japan, and also all other countries. It's glad to be here in this very interesting discussion forum. So I think in terms of the forest and land use sectors, as you know that last year during COP-26, of about 145 leaders, worldwide leaders actually signed, Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use, trying to stop and halt deforestation worldwide. This actually includes also 3, highly deforested countries in the tropical region. So Brazil, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia as the 3rd largest tropical nations. I think what I would like to say is that since then, I think Dmitry and other speakers already speak about pretty much some geopolitical dynamics recently. The crisis in Ukraine and a war with Russia and so forth. So this, of course, has direct or indirect impact as well in the forestry and land use sector, especially on the issues of bioenergy, for example, because then, with the scarcity of not the scarcity, but with the increased price of the energy, the demand for bioenergy is also increased. And as we know, that Indonesia is actually one of the the largest exporters of palm oil. That is actually main source of bioenergy for many other countries, and when the product is actually exported. So we know that the drivers of forest loss in South Asia, in Congo Basin, in the Amazons are pretty much the same, although it's actually coming from different reasons. In Brazil and the Amazon, for example, it goes because of cattle ranching, but also large scales in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia. It's because of the big agriculture commodities, including palm oil, while in Africa it's because of the smallholders activities, including fuelwood, charcoal, and so forth. But I guess the demand of energy that actually comes from natural sources such as bioenergy may actually hinder forest protection and forest conservation in the future if the production of this livestock oil or this bioenergy oil are not maintained or safely guarded in a way that actually this also conserve forests. Yeah. So I think it will happen to any nations who will become, or who is now becoming the production of bioenergy. So not only Indonesia, but I guess also in Colombia, also in Cameroon and Africa, and so forth. The second is that I guess what really needs to be there, and what has been also progressing, is actually an effort to try and develop more established forest carbon market. There are several already certification bodies, but also efforts to how forest-rich countries could actually really trade their carbon market. It's already been happening in some countries, but in Indonesia, I think it's still heavily under regulations of the government and in the preparation process. But I guess all in all, if you have sufficient funding or financial incentive to conserve forests through one example, this forest carbon market, while at the same time as well the practice to utilize forests better, like for example bioenergy productions or to fulfill the subsistence or basic livelihood of the forest-dependent people, then hopefully this can actually support forest protection and forest conservation efforts globally, but also in different regions. I think I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Arief. You already mentioned about the climate financing, and back at COP26 there was $19 billion US dollars committed for forest land use, including support for indigenous people as well. Do you know any progress on that 19 billion pledge?
Well, yeah, so far I don't think that there is really a progress on that. There are a number of discussions, of course, how actually this pledge can become a reality. But I guess with the current economic crisis, geopolitical dynamics, and so forth, countries who are pledging to actually provide the support, I think they also have different realities, how actually they need to reallocate their budget or for some other purposes. But I know that some leading nations, for example, like Norway, for example, that just recently also restart the partnership with Indonesia. This still shows how countries, Indonesia, Norway, but also donor countries, other donor countries like US or UK, they are still trying to provide support to protect tropical forest regions. But yeah, I guess the situation is becoming very difficult everywhere, not only in the energy sector but also in the forest and land use sectors.
So I think, thank you, Mas Arief. And there's also the infamous 100 billion committed to be mobilized for developing countries and vulnerable countries as well, and we're falling short of that commitment. So maybe I would like to address this question to Mika-san and also Aditri. How do we make sure that developed countries really keep up their promise and make things happen with regard to the 100 billion? Are we lacking a financial mechanism to get the funding and channel it to the countries that need the most? Or how should we do this, and how to make sure that the committed funding will not be overshadowed by the current global economic inflation?
Who should go first? Becca?
Yes, you can go first, please, Aditri.
All right, thank you. That's the 100 billion question, isn't it? This year, things are looking really bleak to actually nail any commitments, any concrete commitments in terms of climate finance. But I guess just going back to your question, what could be a potential strategy? Potential strategy could be for the African group of negotiators, the small island states, and the G77 to, as a negotiating bloc, really come together and create, one big ask, and that is to not only to push, right, for the $100 billion climate finance target year, which is 2023, for it to not be renegotiated, but to continue to push for the ask to actually scale up, because $100 billion is not going to be enough in terms of climate finance. There is a bigger target that had been put on the table, and that needs to amount to 1.3 trillion USD by 2030, I think. And this is not just from public sources, but also from private sources. and it needs to be advanced once again on the negotiating table. In addition to that, we also need to think about specific financing mechanisms that will be required in key climate action strategies. For instance, coal transition. We spoke about coal transition finance under the Just Energy Transition Partnership Scheme. For instance, that needs to be additional to the $100 billion. We also, there was also a demand made last year, and I think this will also come to the fore again this year, given that COP-27 will be the African COP, as it will be the COP that will take place on African soil, of the loss and damage financing facility and also of the adaptation financing facility. Those two need to be additional to the $100 billion climate finance ask. So the COP27 needs to be about finance. It needs to talk about, and it will also, one thing worth noting, the COP27 will take place with the, with major climate impact events in its backdrop, right? We had record heat waves in China, in the US, in Europe this year. We also, everyone has witnessed, has witnessed the shock of the Pakistan floods that have displaced over 30 million people. And we also are looking into a period of drought and famine that's gonna cripple the Horn of Africa. So these major climate impact events, we hope that will highlight the urgency, in spite of the geopolitical crisis engulfing the world at the moment, but the climate crisis is here. And climate finance, not just for mitigation, but also for loss and damage and for adaptation, is going to be badly needed. And these mechanisms need to be put in place, and disbursements need to happen today, in fact. So yeah, that's my response to that question, Becca.
Thank you. Mika-san, do you have anything? Do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, it's apparent that we need to confirm the developed nations that promises that to deliver the finance to the developing countries, but at the same time that we have to make sure that what kind of money to be used in what kind of project. Like for example, the ADB's project of the energy transition mechanism, that is quite a good one. But at the same time that if the still some government tried to maintain the fossil use in the some East Asian nations, and then tried to make it to lock in those nations that in the use of the fossil fuel, and then if the money is used in that direction, that is not useful. So maybe that we have to have a clear definition what kind of project that we need to invest.
And I also noticed that looking at the climate finance flow, very little support is given for adaptation measures, whereas we see that the support for capacity building a resilient infrastructure is very much needed. So what is the biggest obstacle, in getting adaptation activities financed by the developed countries? This has always been like my issue with the climate finance flow. Perhaps, Mas Arif, if you can, shed a light on this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Well, I guess in my perspective is the mitigation, climate mitigations or mitigation actions is always seen as much more prominent, but also let's say has much more impact compared to climate adaptation, which is actually not correct. But I guess for donor countries, what I've seen as well is that providing incentives or support or funding to mitigate climate change, like for example to reduce emissions from deforestation, for example, to let's say, transition to renewable energy and so forth, actually has much more direct impact as compared if the donor countries actually, invest in climate adaptation. But as we know that actually climate adaptation has much more influence or impacted because of the climate crisis, because then we talk about the people itself, right? People on the ground, people who marginalized, people who are directly impacted because of already mentioned before, flood, for example, in Pakistan, heat waves in Bangladesh, in some other countries in Europe, in the US, and so forth. So this is something that I guess we need to think, and countries has to, especially developed countries has to realize actually that trying to tackle the issues of climate adaptation is actually, if it is not as equally important as a climate mitigation, is actually more important than climate mitigation. Tackling the climate mitigations action. So second is that I guess what is also difficult is because for climate adaptation, there is no single metrics to measure what is actually the rate of success when the investment is actually given to some adaptation project, for example, compared to the mitigation projects that has actually, fixed metrics, which is actually reduced ton of carbon or reduced ton of CO2. In the adaptation, it is actually, you could have like different metrics there, and this is something that I guess also becoming not only a discussion, but I guess a challenges for donors, and on which certain adaptation projects they actually need to invest and need to work on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Arif. So before we go into the Q&A session, I want to, I would like to, go back on a more general question. So considering what's going on with, the changing, the geopolitical challenge, and also the global economy inflation. So what does the power map look like? Do you think would look like in COP-27? Maybe we'll start with Mika-san. Do you want to go first? You're on mute.
Yeah. Someone is raising the hand. Is it fine?
Yes, I'll address the questions from the participants later, but thank you for reminding me of that. So, so for participants, for those who just join us, welcome. And also, if you have any questions, please drop the questions in the chat box, and the committee will help to summarize it, and then I'll help to facilitate the question for you. Thank you so much. So please go ahead, Nika-san.
Yeah, for the COP-27, that I think that you have sent us several messages that beforehand, including that the role of the non-state actors. I think that under this, that the difficult, that the political dimension, that it's apparent, like increasingly non-state actors are playing greater role. And then because the agreements at the national level are becoming more difficult to reach. And then, for example, that we organized the Japan Climate Initiative, which was started in 2018, that with 150 companies and then local authorities, and now it's become 700. So the more and more the non-state actors are really getting that involved in the climate actions, and then they have their own pledges. For example, Renewable 100, they set the kind of a new criteria for procurement of the renewables for global supply chain companies. And then those kind of actions really accelerate the greener energy transition in the everywhere in each country. So the at the COP27 that we there's a kind of a no major political agreement will be expected, but those kind of voluntary pledges and non-state actors that the law will be accelerated, and then that we would like to support that kind of actions at the COP-27.
Thank you, Mika-san. Before we go to the next speaker, I want to highlight what you point out about the political agreements. So in which area do you think the agreement, the negotiation in COP27 will be the most delicate?
Are you asking me again?
Yes.
Yeah, and then so I think that we have already discussed that the kind of enhance the adaptation interventions, and also like kind of we have to focus on the finance that support for the developing countries, because the developed countries already pledged the 100 billion we have already discussed, and then they just extended that deadline. So these kind of things that has to have the clear timeline phases, and then developed countries has to commit their pledges.
Thank you, Mika-san. So Dietrich, can you share your thoughts on that?
Thank you. I am in full agreement with what Mika-san has just said. I mean, I agree. I am very pessimistic that we are going to see a political agreement, a new enhanced political agreement around climate action, resulting out of this COP. I mean, this COP is, is not, a specific, like, for example, next COP is going to be the big stocktake COP, and there is already a big milestone that has been set by the UNFCCC process. But this COP was supposed to be the African COP, and it was supposed to be the COP where we reach political agreements around, loss and damage and adaptation. But it is now looking less likely so, because of the current global economic situation and the geopolitical crisis. I do also agree with Mika-san. There's going to be a lot of tugging back and forth, right, on finance, right? Anything regarding finance is going to be a push from the developing countries about scaling up the finance commitment or finance pledge, and there's going to be a pushback from the developed nations regarding finance. But I feel like in the upcoming COP, we might see more enhanced non-state, so private sector, especially private sector commitments, global net zero commitments by major corporate actors has been already made last year. I think we will see like an enhancement of that. We will also, I'm expecting that there are also new sectoral initiatives that might come up or be initiated at this COP, like, for example, in the oceans, oceans and climate mitigation, or, oceans and climate in general. That seems to also be like a promising, there seems to be promising development there. But particularly because I work in energy and energy transition, and especially in coal phase out, I would like to see, progress. I would like to see concrete progress made around, these just energy transition partnership deals. I really hope that we get an additional deal, not just a South Africa deal from last year, that we have new and additional deals announced at the upcoming COP.
Thank you, Dietrich. Mas Arif?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Dietrich, and Mika-san already mentioned a lot. So about the the involvement and role of private sectors, through, for example, Global Financial Alliance network that has been committed during COP26, or as we know, we are also working with several other organizations on science-based target initiatives, whereby more than 1,000 multinational companies has been joining effort to try to achieve the net zero target through a way that is actually more sustainable, or lower emissions in the production process, but also in the supply chain. That's true. But I guess on the top of the private sector's commitment, we will see hopefully during this COP is actually more discussions as well on the agriculture part, because as we know that the agriculture sectors, food and agriculture is actually also one of the issues that is actually very critical and for you know, for a global audience, not only inside of production but also on the side of consumption. So this is actually how to feed you know, people globally, but also for developed countries actually how to reduce food loss and waste. And this is actually something that hopefully can be discussed or negotiated, discussed further during COP27. If I would like to say one thing is that I really hope that COP27 is no longer about, you know, countries sign a pledge on reducing deforestation, on transition towards renewable energy, or, you know, other commitments or pledging, but it's more on the implementations, right? But I think this is really the key, and this is really the challenges. If and then hopefully, but we know that the situation is very difficult right now in terms of the economic situations, geopolitical situations. But I do really hope that the COP27 will be a COP of implementations. But yeah, we'll see. Thanks.
Thank you, Mas Arif. And you know, Egypt being the host for COP27 is very clear on making on turning pledges and commitments into actions, even you know, even to investable projects. So before my one last question before the Q&A is, you know, they say that in every crisis there is opportunities. So I would like to ask all the speakers, starting with Mas Arif, you know, what's the opportunities, especially for developing countries and, you know, vulnerable countries, where do you think the opportunities lie for developing countries and, you know, vulnerable countries, and how should we align ourselves? But more specifically, I think another question for that is that how should countries like Indonesia, Brazil, and the DRC, you know, take this COP, take the opportunities from this COP?
I guess for developing countries, especially for forest-rich nations, they need to be more ambitious in you know, conserving the forest, and at the same time as well utilizing wisely in more sustainable way the forest resources that they have remains, you know, the remaining forests. Why is that? Because we may not be able to deny that developing countries may still really rely on its forest and forest resources, but how to use it more sustainably. At the same time as well, the government, up from the central government, subnational government, but also with support from non-state actors, including businesses, this has to be, you know, very ambitious, like Indonesia, for example, that has pledged to achieve the net sink from forestry and land use sector by 2030. This is actually a very bold commitment, not only to achieve you know, the last NDC target, which is actually from 32 to 43%, but achieving net zero target from different sectors, food, forestry and land use, for example. This is very bold, and this has to be complemented by a clear plan, roadmap, regulation, but also financial sources. I think this also go through or similar with other countries as well. Yeah, Brazil with DRC, but with many other forested nations as well, how to use the forest sources wisely. And I really hope that the developing nations during the COP-27, they actually may have much more voice and act because they have a strong modalities. I mean, forests are very important for the life of this planet. So if the country that possesses this forest actually has a strong and bold ambition to protect the forest, I believe that developed nation may also, and hopefully may also be, moved to provide much more support to help the developing countries to achieve the objective in protecting the world forest. I think this is something. So it has first comes from ourselves, the commitment, and then leadership. Otherwise, it will go nowhere. Thanks.
Thank you, Mas Arief. Yes, but Diti, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, in the similarly to what Mas Arief had said, in terms of the energy sector, the opportunity that that presents itself to developing countries in the age of the global crisis is that this is basically the time to try to accelerate or try to showcase for ambitious energy transition plans, not just targets, but also, a roadmap along with design for institutions and governance that can ensure delivery on accelerated energy transition promises, and especially for nations that are, that have an abundance and as well as dependence on fossil fuel resources. This, showcasing ambition and a detailed plan in form of a roadmap is going to be very important to secure those energy transition financing financing that is badly needed. Because as we all know, energy transition, accelerating the uptake of renewable energy and phasing out of coal requires a lot of financing, a lot of investment, and it's not a small number. We're looking at big figures here. So this is an opportunity for developing countries to, get developed countries to actually look at investing in developing countries first, because at the moment they're unable to scale up renewable energy uptake, at least not within the near future in their respective jurisdictions, and to look at, getting, decarbonization, accelerating decarbonization of the energy sector in developing countries. But in order to do that, developing countries need to come to COP by, showcasing ambition, showcasing a roadmap, detailed roadmap of, how they intend to decarbonize, accelerate decarbonization of the power sector, of the transport sector, of the industrial sector. Indonesia is in the midst of doing that. Indonesia has put, target on the table to reach net zero by 2060 or sooner. Indonesia has come up with various, has exercised modeling and is in the process of actually officially legislating a roadmap for its power sector to reach net zero by 2060 or sooner. There are possibilities. Indonesia has showed political willingness to do early decommissioning of its coal assets. And this is all very great news, but it is not enough. Indonesia, for example, just one of the examples, as a country needs to come to COP with more ambitious targets because it needs to be in line, for example, with the global ask to phase out coal, a complete phase out for coal in 2040 and not in 2056 as the current roadmap suggests, for instance. So it needs to be all aligned with the 1.5 target as stipulated in the Glasgow Pact, and it needs to go with the recommendations that have already been made by IPCC, especially for coal in this case, is to reach a complete phase out by 2040 and not later than that. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, Mika-san.
For the not only for Indonesia, I would like to mention about the Southeast Asian countries. Last week, that IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, released a new report about the potential of renewables promotion in ASEAN countries. It says that the 2/3 of energy demand will be covered by renewable energies. It's a kind of a huge potential that your country have. And then that not only they're covered, of course, that it's need intensive investment at the same time, but overall, it will be compensate that current investment in the fossil fuel will be instead of the investing that the renewables. And then those kind of renewable investment and then realization of 2/3 that are covered by renewables, not only for renewable energy technologies, but also we need to have the investment in the transmission system, digitalization, and that needs the countries go together and then that go forward. And then it has to be now or never, because you have to meet the carbon neutrality by 2050. So that's a kind of a suggestion by IRENA. And then I totally support this idea for developing countries, especially Southeast Asian countries.
All right, thank you so much, Mika-san, Aditri, and Mas Arif. With that, I am opening the Q&A session, and we have a hand raised from Aftab Alam Khan, CEO of Resilient Future International. Let me just unmute, and feel free to ask the question, and please mention who you're addressing the question to.
Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very useful webinar. Congratulations to all the organizers. My question is to all the participants because they are of strategic nature. For example, the whole purpose of the COP-27 and the previous COP is to make sure that there is a substantial reduction in greenhouse gases. We know that in COP-26, we were not happy with the ambitions, and there was an agreement to revise these NDCs. And 26 September, only 2 days back, day before yesterday was the deadline to submit those updated NDCs. And only 23 out of 200 countries submitted the revised updates. So it's a big gap. Secondly, the major emitters, US, European Union, and China, for example, they did not increase their ambitions according to the requirement. And according to some estimates, there is a gap of 17 to 20 billion tons of equivalent of carbon, which should have been reduced by 2030. My question is that with this progress, how optimistic we should be, and this will be a sin to continue the from Japan, who's because good to share that Indonesia, Australia, and few other countries raised their ambition, which is very good. And secondly, that keeping in view the Pakistan devastation floods, thank you very much, those who have mentioned it, what should be the strategy to push through loss and damage finance facility in COP27? One last thing, there is a big inequality question as well. Sharm el-Sheikh is so expensive, things have become so expensive that many countries would not be able to send, poor countries would not be able to send their participants or will have to reduce their delegation. So I think in these challenges, how do you see that world would be really able to get a promising agreement in COP27? Thank you very much for this opportunity.
So thank you, Mr. Khan. Perhaps Mas Arif, do you want to take this, Mas Arif? And yeah, maybe you can start answering the question, Mas Arif.
Yeah, I could try because there are a number of questions there from Mr. Aftab Alam Khan. So I think I would agree that even until now, until 2 days from now, we are still in a short of ambitions. I guess in the last COP, in the COP26, even with all pledges, the world will still going to increase the global temperature around 2.7 to 3.4 degrees, if I'm not wrong. But even I think I know that this is really a big challenges, but we could also see some lights here. I mean, increasing ambition is one thing, but how to make that ambition really becomes a reality, it's one critical way, and it's actually more difficult to achieve. For example, just a couple of weeks ago, I think the U.S. Congress just President Biden just released this Inflation Reduction Act. This is the act that will actually help the U.S. government to achieve their climate ambitions by 2030. Reducing emissions by 52%, not up to 50%, but it's actually going to that direction. So creating green jobs, transitioning towards renewable energy and so forth. So I think what I know that this is actually difficult. Either we actually push for higher ambitions, or actually how to keep the the existing ambitions really can be implemented. This is another thing that actually we as a non-state actors actually could try to support our government or our countries, or actually through public discussions and doing science and so forth. That this is actually something that is actually the country has to try to pursue on. I would also agree on the issues of big inequality, because the issues of a just transition. This is not something that is really easy to achieve. I would say that even in Indonesia, for example, if we transition from coal energy to renewable energy, I mean, there has to be really a good plan how the employee, for example, from the brown sector can be really reallocated and then reassigned and then get a still a job there if the energy is actually the energy source actually transitioning towards clean and renewable energy. So I would say, and not to mention as well that low carbon development pathways. This is actually something that has to address not only the issue on climate and also economy, but also on the people itself. And I guess other speakers already really mentioned that ambition is one thing, but really how to come up with a detailed roadmap and plan, but also sufficient financial resources, if not support. This is another thing. Yeah, I think that is actually my comment for now. Hoping other speakers may also chime in there. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Mas Arief. I'm going to have to address the second question to D3, because we have hands raised, and I just want to make sure that we have time for other questions. So D3, if you can quickly address on the question on loss and damage. How can we, push forward to make the loss and damage to be quicker, set up quicker, and then disperse quicker?
Thank you for the question. I'm so sorry if if there's background noise at the moment. I just want to say I'm actually pessimistic that we will see commitment and also any agreement on implementation on loss and damage financing facility at the upcoming COP. It will dominate the narrative to some extent, I feel, but given the history of climate negotiations, I am pessimistic, and my prediction is that this particular agenda will be kind of like held hostage vis-a-vis other bigger asks around climate mitigation strategies, like for example the climate finance, or any other mitigation asks, for example around targets or mechanisms for emissions reductions commitments, etc. So Yeah, I'm sorry to have to convey pessimism, but around loss and damage, I feel like it's going to be a major narrative, at least in the first week. But I'm not sure if we're going to see any commitment or pledge or even any agreement on implementation.
Yeah, thank you, Dmitry. But I'm gonna have to, even though I'm the moderator for this discussion, but I want to add something on loss and damage. Just last night I joined the Twitter space, and Denmark is I think the first country to pledge the loss and damage was Scotland, and Denmark just announced, I think a week ago, that they're disbursing, actually this year they're disbursing about $13 million for the loss and damage. Just like a quick info on that. So thank you so much, Dmitry. Another question is, I see hands raised, but I want to address this question first from the chat box. It's from Dr. Shabana Fayez from Kuwait Azam University from Islamabad. Thank you for joining us. So the question is how to bridge the gap between the state-centric climate diplomacy and people-centric climate diplomacy, specifically in South Asia, and its successful models. So perhaps Mika, do you wanna start with this? Mika, I
just reading the questions here. Now that's a good question. That actually that we are situated in the East Asian nation, so not the kind of South Asian nations, and then we are always feeling the gap that in the context of climate diplomacy and then the political diplomacy in the East Asian nations. But I think that the implementation of the concrete actions such as renewable energy promotion, and as I mentioned, for the Asian nations that we need to promote the renewable together because we need strong interconnections between countries. Those kind of actions will strengthen the political diplomacy and then climate change diplomacy in action. That is my answer for that.
Thank you, Mika-san. So from Dmitry or Mas Arif, do you want to volunteer and add something on this question?
I would like to perhaps add that I believe that the key to bridging this gap also has to come from the UNFCCC itself, as the top climate diplomacy arena. It needs to continue to provide not just room, but also a seat at the table to non-state representatives. I know that that's not how the forum is designed, but times have changed, right? This forum was launched, back in the days when the diplomatic channels were so state-centric, right? There's dominated by state actors. But now, as you can see, all of the good initiatives that have been implemented, all of the success stories actually come from non-state entities or from subnational entities. And so I feel like there needs to be a multi-track system built into the UNFCCC. The UNFCCC itself needs to change. There are already many great examples of international fora that not just acknowledges the importance of these multi-track, of these other approaches, and then create a multi-track system, because that shows official recognition. So I believe the UNFCCC itself needs to evolve in order to bridge this gap. I mean, last year and the previous year, we've seen shrinking space for non-state entities to be part of the whole thing. I mean, we're not just talking about the actual negotiations, but also all of the side events, etc. It is increasingly becoming difficult, for example, for civil society entities to access, all of the events associated with the COP. It's becoming increasingly hard for media and new media to get accredited. So these are some of the logistic things that also contribute to the widening gap, and dare I say schism, between the people-centric approach and the state-centric approach.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Dmitry and Mika-san. So next up is from Eduardo Lim, if you can open your mic, introduce yourself, and yeah, convey the question to the speakers that you want to ask to, please.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, am I audible at the moment? Am I audible?
Yes, you're good.
Thank you. So this question is for all speakers. As my name is Warder Briones Jr. I'm a grade 12 high school teacher professor in the Philippines in Mangrove. My question is for the speakers here on the floor. How can we, as citizens of our various countries, ensure that our governments attain a compromise between sustainable development without harming the industrialization ambitions of developing countries, as well as ensuring accountability to our leaders on that their projects do not only use the funds for corruption, but also make sure the funds are used wisely in attaining the targets of sustainable development of these projects by industrialization by developing countries, such as Indonesia, the Philippines, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Eduardo. Perhaps, Mas Arif, if we can start with you for this question.
The question was not clear actually, but I think it's around how we as a citizen actually hold the government commitment accountable to do the sustainable development. Is that it? Around that area?
The question is mostly how can we as citizens ensure that we can ensure that the governments maintain a compromise between sustainable development and the industrialization ambitions of developing countries, and to ensure accountability to our governments to make sure they maintain sustainable development within their projects of their targets, etc.
Yeah, thanks. This is really like 1 billion or 10 billion US dollars questions, because this is not easy, right? As we know it, especially for developing nations in Southeast Asia, including Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand, for example, and some other countries. But I think what I would like to emphasize here is it has to come started from the plan, the development planning. I mean, what we have experienced in Indonesia, actually, we actually support WI support Ministry of Development Planning to come up with the 5-year development planning document 2023-2027. That actually this is the very first time the government actually put environmental let's say measures, emissions reduction as the macro indicators for economic development. It has never happened before. So is it enough that the 5-year development planning coming from the Ministry of Development Planning? No, of course it's not enough, because it has to be allocated to different line ministries with sufficient funding and so forth. But it actually opened discussion that Indonesia, or a country like Indonesia, Philippines, and so forth, actually has the possibility to come up with low carbon development pathways. And this actually also then triggered further discussion, whereby Indonesia finally submitted the long-term strategies to achieve net zero target by 2060 or prior to 2060. This is just one example. But the second, what I would like to emphasize as well is that really working working together with the local champions, with the local leaders at the sub-national level. And this is actually really the key there, because in some cases, what I found, not only in Indonesia, but in many developing countries, you may not be able to give direct influence to national government, but it's really it's pretty much easy to work with a sub-national government if the local champions can be convinced they actually have strong ambitions. They actually then can be supported to achieve that ambition transition towards renewable energy in that state or in that island or in that region, or protecting forests and so forth. And then we use this to scale up to other regions or provinces or to larger scale. I think this will actually then open the minds of the national government that this target is actually can be achieved, and not only focus on economic development per se, but also try to achieve the objective of sustainable development goals. So basically the balance between people, climate, and nature, people, climate, and economy. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah. Thank you, Mas. Yes, Mika-san, please.
Yeah, not only for the developing countries, but the developed nations as well, that it's very difficult to directly influence the national policy. So we somehow that working with the kind of ambitious business companies, it's a non-state actors. And then as he said, like we worked on the very ambitious local government, such as Tokyo metropolitan government and then other Kanto areas, the prefectural government, and it's very easy access to the local, how can I say, parliament there. So even the kind of council members are one of the friends of ours or something like that. It's easy to access. So we can easily convince them that because some areas really specifically has the direct impact of the climate crisis sometimes. So we can elaborate the discussion there. And then some area really has the plan of construction of new coal-fired power plant, for example. And then the local fishermen, they really against such kind of new initiative or the climate crisis, additional ones. So we start with the local area, and then that, of course, that we also talk to the national parliament members, but at the same time that we do it together. I think that tactics that are really useful in other countries as well.
Thank you, Mika-san. So I see a hand raised. So I would like to invite Professor Aminul Karim from Bangladesh. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, Rebecca. Nice. You have been moderating very well, so well. So, in fact, I had given my question some time back. I've written the fate of the largest mangrove forest in Bangladesh along the Bay of Bengal. It is dying. It is dying because it is not getting enough sweet water from the river system. And there's a dead zone coming up in the Bay of Bengal. And if this forest is going to die, this was a great shield against natural disasters like the floods, like the storm surges, cyclones, and so on and so forth. To get shield to the people of Bangladesh. Now, I would like to especially ask Mr. Arif and others as well to give your comments on the future of this very important forest for about 180 million people who live in Bangladesh. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Mr. Professor Karim. So, Mas Arif, do you want to address this, please?
Yeah. Thanks, Professor Aminul Karim, for the question. So I guess this is not a unique challenges only for Bangladesh, but for many other island countries like Indonesia, for example. This also happens. But protecting mangrove, I know it's very critical for Bangladesh, for example, in particular, because on the flood plain, then really mangrove ecosystems really protect the people there from storm surge or from increase in flood and so forth. But as we know it, that ecosystem restoration is not cheap, and the second, restoration ecosystem is not quick. Yeah. So this happens for not only for mangrove or peatlands, the wetland ecosystem, but also for dryland ecosystems. What I would like to say is that I don't think that I have a good answers to your questions, but really the commitment, the commitment from local people, from local champions, supported by local NGOs, for example, this could provide an example that then can be scaled up at the larger scale. Again, I would say that in many cases in Indonesia as well, some small organizations, they are working with a group of community in the coast area along the mangrove ecosystem, trying to, you know, not only protect but also restore mangrove, and then at the same time as well creating alternative livelihood out of the mangrove forest there. And once the good example is provided, they could really have, you know, a bigger opportunity to access to financial sources. This is on the top of course, the government commitment that has to be built coming from the top. And I know that at least for the case of Indonesia, the World Bank provided, you know, quite a support working with the government of Indonesia in trying to restore 600,000 hectares of mangrove until 2024. But this has to, you know, has to come from the top, but at the same time also from the bottom. So it somehow, hopefully, it will meet in the middle. I think that will be my response for now. Professor, thanks.
Thank you, Mas Arif. We are short on time, so I have like one last question. This is about, and I want to address this to all three speakers. If you can wrap up the answer in 1 minute. So this is a question from CUHK Dila. I hope I get it right. I got it right. So how is the implementation of the new carbon market regulation in Indonesia, and in Mika-san's case, perhaps in other countries, can help the country to achieve its NDC target? So perhaps D3, do you wanna go first?
Well, 1 minute, right? Carbon pricing is going to be an important way to integrate the externalities, the cost of externalities caused by, you know, the greenhouse gases, right? That's the theory. In its implementation, Indonesia needs to start today, building the right institutions, putting the right regulatory framework in place, and also creating awareness as well as enhancing education around what it means to have carbon markets, right? There's a lot of misperception currently out there. The narrative is dominated by this whole, like, it's very polarized at the moment. It's either, you know, entities looking at carbon markets as a way to generate additional investments and finance for existing business as usual projects. On the other hand, there are pan-nationalistic views around the carbon markets that say, oh, this is going to basically, you know, make Indonesia losers, right? In the sense that a lot of the resources that are going to be claimed, you know, by external forces, and thereby we need to stop the development and progress around, you know, building a carbon market to begin with. We need to stop this, you know, there's carbon markets associated with commercialization and therefore exploitation. So we need to work on that first. Indonesia is really, really far from having getting to a point where carbon markets can be an effective and integral part of the solution. But Indonesia needs to start today. That's my answer to the Indonesian situation. But if I am asked if carbon markets is part of the solution, then it's a resounding yes. It needs to be part of the solution, or else, you know, the economy isn't going to shift unless those externalities are integrated properly. And that needs to start with pricing carbon. Thank you.
Thank you, D3. It's always nice to discuss about the carbon market with you. Okay, Mika-san, do you want to go next, please?
There are kind of a major two tools under the carbon pricing. One is a taxation, and one is a carbon emission trading that with cap. And then I think that the carbon tax that has to be implemented in the countries such as Japan, that because that we can have the very cheap coal-fired power plant that in the energy market. So we need a kind of a taxation for the fossil fuel. And then after that, that some corporate can attend the carbon trading scheme, but it has to have the mandate for those countries, companies to engage the carbon trading. And then that it has to have the cap. That is a kind of a lessons that we have learned that from the European example. And then, but not only the carbon pricing, that we have to see the kind of a real implementation of the project, not only under the carbon pricing scheme. And then that actually the renewables have become the cheapest power option in many of the countries. I think that it's not only under the carbon pricing, but also that under this fuel prices soaring, that the renewable has a kind of incentivized to be promoted in the various areas, and even by the households, I think. And then that is a kind of could be the motivation to us. And then that after this Russian invention has even ended, finishes, that we need to implement this carbon pricing to make fossil at the same price as that we are now, and then not how can I say that backlash that we can have the cheaper fossil fuel prices that after this situation. So maybe the carbon pricing is that now the thing that we have to implement.
Yes, thank you, Mika-san. So Mas Arif, unfortunately, you only have 30 seconds to address this question. Please, Mas Arif.
No, actually, I don't have anything to add, but I would agree with G3 that the carbon market and also Mika that it has to be part of solutions. That's one. Second is that I guess yeah, we need to see how the price of carbons actually really has to be put at the level that is actually you know what I'd like to say, at the level that is actually can really compensate the emissions produced resulted by countries or by the private sectors, so that really the price of the carbons really the key. If it is actually then too low and it has no really direct impact to country to really trying to reduce the emissions or from the businesses. I think I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mas Arif. With that, unfortunately, I would have to conclude this Q&A session and basically the entire discussion today. So before that, I would like to thank all of the speakers. Thank you so much. It's such an insightful, hopefully it's an insightful and also fruitful discussion for all of the participants. And thank you so much for the participants from all over the world who has been joining us with the discussion, and hopefully it will be useful for all of the negotiators in the run into COP27. So again, thank you so much, and also for the committee. And with this, I am going to hand this over to Ray, please. Ray, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Rebecca. And thank you to all the speakers for sharing your incredible insights. And again, thank you, Rebecca, for moderating today's discussion. And I would also like to thank all the participants for joining from our Zoom room and our YouTube channel. I believe that all the participants here who are tuning here today have had a fruitful discussions and gained new knowledge from all of our speakers today. So ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of our third event of FPCI-GRIPS Virtual Public Forum Series. And today's event is available for a rewatch on our official YouTube channel at Secretariat FPCI. So once again, thank you everyone, and see you at our next event.